What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing police encounters with high strangeness. In my opinion, when someone takes on the job of protecting and serving the wider public as a police officer, when it's done right and with love and discipline, of course, there's almost nothing that could be more noble. These people, when they aren't coming in just wanting power or already corrupted by the system that put them in charge, put their literal life on the line every single day to serve others and to protect them. Especially in the United States in more recent years, if you're a cop and you aren't corrupt, there's so many dangers out there for you every single day when all you're doing is going to work that it's almost insane, and I don't know how anyone even does it anymore these days. So I just want to say right off the bat, respect. I personally know several police officers, most of them retired, and one of them specifically has shared with me some pretty amazing instances of when he had to go up against something that wasn't in the realm of what we understand or even what he was trained to do. He literally had to think and learn on the fly. What up, Blue Crossroads? Listen, I know some people are going to be turned off just by my praise of cops here, but hear me out, because that isn't what this video is all about. What happens when police officers find themselves up against things like extraterrestrial and demonic forces, when they're not part of a fringe group of detectives, which do exist, by the way, and they have to think on the fly and then live the rest of their lives with the knowledge of that experience and how they decided to handle it? So many officers of the law all across the world sometimes have to deal with dangers that lurk just beyond the veil of what we know as reality, and that's what I'm here to talk with you all about today. So set the alarm for your doors, guys, cuddle up, dim the lights as we take a look at some of the most bizarre and unreal things police officers have reported having to deal with. Let's jump right in. So, many police encounters with strange entities, specifically humanoids, seem to definitely involve entities that are out of this world. We took some reports from the files of Albert Rosales 2 weeks ago for our video about strange deaths in ufology, but I also found some at that time of police officers having some extremely strange encounters with things that are no doubt and absolutely out of this world. The first one that caught my attention was one that was originally recorded by renowned paranormal investigator John Keel. It was 1996, and it happened in the town of Gaffney, South Carolina, in the United States. At around 4 in the morning, 2 police officers named only C. Hutchins and A. Husky were driving in a shady, very rural section of Gaffney that's known as the West Buford Street Extension when they came near a right-angle bend in the road. Suddenly, and out of the darkness and into their headlights, a metallic-looking object sort of just seemingly bloomed right there in front of them. It was wide and spherical, and it had no portholes or visible lights anywhere on the inside of it. This is the rest of the report that was written in Rosales' files. Quote, "The car did not stall as the object settled to within a few feet on the ground. Both men got out of their car in a state of benumbed amazement. Later, Hutchins estimated that the object must have been about 20 feet in diameter. A small door suddenly opened noiselessly on the underside of the sphere, he said, and a short ladder 4 to 6 feet long dropped down. White light poured out of the opening, but neither man could see anything in the interior. A figure appeared in the doorway, descended the ladder, and walked slowly and deliberately towards the 2 police officers. When the figure reached a point about 15 to 20 feet from the 2 men, it stopped. Officer Hutchins said he didn't move stiffly. He moved just like anybody else, but kind of slow, like he was taking his time. He wasn't scared of us or anything like that. In appearance, the humanoid was about the size of a 12-year-old boy, maybe 4 feet. He wore no helmet or headgear and was dressed in a gold suit with no buttons or zippers. His costume was shiny like metal in the reflection of the headlights. It was not self-luminous. The humanoid asked numerous questions and ignored the witnesses when they asked it questions. Hutchins could not remember seeing the feet of the creature. It was standing on high grass, and the feet must have been hidden. Both men could not really remember the full context of the conversation. Hutchins claimed the alien spoke perfect English, didn't have an accent or anything. He acted like he knew exactly what he was saying and doing, did not make any quick moves or false moves. He just stood there and talked to the witnesses. He wanted to know why we were dressed alike. His speech was very precise. He pronounced each word very carefully. When asked where he was from, he just announced, "I will return in 2 days' time. He turned, walked slowly back to the ladder, and climbed into the object. The door closed quietly, and the craft began to whir, a soft whirring sound like an engine with a muffler on it. The object rose slowly and then vanished into the sky. A local councilman found numerous footprints at the site where the little man had stood. There was no return visit by the alien, end quote. Okay, so let's unpack all of that. The men say that they can remember the interaction, but not the specific contents of the conversation. And honestly, guys, that's perfectly usual for these types of encounters. And by now, I've actually come to expect this from these sorts of interactions with otherworldly beings. We all know by now that they can screen memories or erase them completely, as well as making it so we can't remember specifics and everything is hazy when we do try and tell our stories about our meetings with them. I was a bit taken aback by the fact that the men described the being as 4 foot tall, approximately, but then in that same sentence said that it looked like a 12-year-old boy. Now, I know that my 5-year-old son is tall for his age, as he stands at almost 4 feet tall already, but I've not ever met a 12-year-old that's that short. So that leads me to believe that it wasn't the being's height that gave them the impression that it was similar to a 12-year-old boy, but that's just my speculation, and I couldn't find anything else relevant about that detail. Also, if the being was asking why the men were dressed alike, that means it didn't recognize that they were police officers and probably didn't know what a police officer or a cop was. Therefore, it stands to reason for me that it also wouldn't know that these two men might not be in the exact same spot in 2 nights' time. And even if the men had gone back to that exact spot, that doesn't mean the being did. My point is, just because they, meaning those 2 police officers, didn't see it again 2 nights later, doesn't mean it didn't return to that spot or back to somewhere in the area or even on the planet. It didn't specifically say where it would return to or who it would be visiting, right? It didn't tell them what its plans were when it did return, and I think about this only because of how the men had gone out of their way to say how precise the thing was in its diction, and therefore it probably just meant that it was coming back to Earth in 2 nights, and meant it matter-of-factly because that's how it seemed to be as far as the verbiage and vernacular were, just plain and literal to the point. Or they could have received a visit but didn't remember anything about it because we already know that whatever the entity was, it was more than capable of messing with their memories to the point that they couldn't even remember the entirety or details of the conversation. So let me know what you all think about that one in the comments below. Another encounter from Rosales' files was from the following year in 1997 and happened in Ashland, Nebraska. A 22-year-old state trooper named Sergeant Herbert Shermer was out on patrol on the bitter cold night of December 3rd, and he was investigating reports of strange disturbances among some local livestock. It seemed to most of the farmers and to others that there was some sort of wild but natural predator lurking around in the shadows and then attacking the livestock when all of the humans were gone and everything was basically quiet for the night. The first thing that Herbert came across were 2 red lights over Highway 63, which he then took to be a truck parked up in the middle of the road ahead of him, but with the closer he got to the obstruction, he noticed that it was football-shaped and that it was glowing. It was a craft of some sort. It hovered above the ground a little bit and had glowing red lights emanating out of the portholes. It was there for only a split second or two before it shot back up into the night sky upon his approach to it, and it did so with a fiery flash, and that seems to be where that story ends. However, when he looked at the clock, he saw that it was 3 a.m. So 10 whole minutes had passed since he had originally approached that obstruction. The way this was worded was confusing to me, but from what I understand, what I believe they're saying was that he was missing time, and as he drove back to the station, Herb was said to have been bewildered that he was for some reason feeling like he had indeed lost time during that strange and extraordinary investigation. Even if it was only 10 minutes, that's still a missing 10 minutes. And it's got to be creepy no matter how long it was, because you're missing, you have no memory of that time, but you know that it's passed. So he was said to have been feeling very physically sick and realized he had a large, itchy red welt on the back of his neck that he couldn't explain. He would go on to report the whole bizarre encounter, and it caught the attention of a UFO research organization called the Condon Commission, and they believed that he had possibly been abducted. It was suggested to Sergeant Shermer that he get hypnotized because he and the investigators with the research facility wanted to know, or had an inkling that something else had possibly happened that night that he couldn't remember. Again, this should be no surprise to us now because we already know, as I said many times, what these things are capable of doing to our memories. Under hypnosis, things would get so much more bizarre than anyone in this case thought that they could. The report reads, quote, "Under hypnosis, he remembered a different story. Instead of departing, the object moved to a nearby field, landed on 3 legs, while his radio lights and engine failed. Beings then approached his car. They prevented him from fleeing or drawing his revolver by mental block, and one being sprayed the car with a greenish gas while a second being shone a bright light on him. He felt paralyzed and he passed out. The beings were humanoids with thin, long heads, flat noses, slit mouths, and slanted, unblinking eyes. Standing 4.5 to 5 feet tall, the beings had gray-white skin and wore uniforms, boots, gloves, and helmets, also all covered silver gray. The helmet had a small antenna, and the emblem of a winged serpent appeared on the left breast of the uniform. He came to and got out of the car. One being, seemingly the leader, asked him if he was the watchman, then invited him aboard the ship. A ladder descended and the witness entered the craft. The leader asked if he wanted to see how their equipment worked, and he totally agreed, though he really didn't want to. He was in no mood. And I don't really understand that because I don't care what really was going on. Basically, and for the most part, I would want to look inside that ship. But that's just me. The room inside was 20 by 26 feet and 6 feet tall, cold and lighted by strips in the ceiling. This room contained chairs, a control panel, and a viewing screen. The engine had a crystalline rotor linked to 2 columns. The leader demonstrated a device like a tape player, which seemed to transfer data to the witness's mind even while he conversed with the host. A discussion followed, with the leader using broken English and the sound seeming to come from deep inside, but the witness understood the tapes by means of telepathy. I'm not really... The speaker said they came from another galaxy, but had bases on other planets in this solar system beneath the sea and in the polar regions. This ship used an electromagnetic propulsion system and water to operate it, as well as a protective shield. The beings were contacting Earthlings as a way to prepare them for eventual open contact and to prevent them from destroying the Earth. The beings also wanted to confuse Earthlings somewhat. He saw images on a screen of beings standing guard outside of the ship, of the craft flying against a background of stars, and of a mothership in space. At last, the leader asked the witness to forget the experience, then led him out again. He returned to the patrol car and watched the ship take off. Later that night, he felt sick, weak, and nervous. He found a red welt on his neck, suffering a chronic buzzing in his ears, had trouble sleeping, and later he left police work altogether. During the investigation, he refused to reveal some aspects of the encounter, end quote. Now, I think that means he refused to reveal aspects that he knew, but he was just afraid to say for fear of ridicule or whatever else. No wonder he was afraid of revealing too much, even if he did remember more than he originally claimed to have. I mean, who knows how you would feel in that situation. I found in other sources that the beings said that they got their power too from electrical lines and that they were from the planet Venus. That's insane. And the admittal that they're trying to confuse us, it's probably to try and let us know they're here, but also to avoid mass hysteria or something like that, in my opinion. This encounter got to me a little bit because I've taken some criticism in my personal life, not just on YouTube, but IRL, in real life, about talking about the Galactic Federation and how they hover just above the Earth and outside of our atmosphere in a cloaked ship, a mothership. Herb Shermer quit the force several months later due to post-traumatic stress disorder, and apparently he was so ridiculed by other officers and the Weiner community at large, he felt like he had no choice. Due to his incessant need to continuously talk about his experience almost nonstop, his wife also eventually left him over it as well. So it basically destroyed this man's life. Moving on. In 1976, there's a report from El Pedrosa, Sevilla, Spain, where 3 officers and a professor went together on a hunting trip, and while they were headed to where they were going to hunt, the 3 men rounded a curve in the road and saw a very tall figure just standing there. It was around 6.5 feet tall, but it wasn't merely standing in that, it was actually hovering about 2 feet above the ground. It had facial features that weren't clearly visible, and it wore a shiny white outfit with a white belt that had a bright red and shining rectangle on the buckle area. They had been driving, and as they sat there in their car, not really knowing what to do next or what was going on, they saw through the rearview mirror a huge and very bright object there on the ground near the entity that was oval in shape and that was emitting a dim white light out of it. They were incredibly scared and therefore decided right then and there that they no longer wanted to go hunting, drove out of there and away from that scene as fast as they possibly could. So that one happened to off-duty officers, and I wish I had more information, but in keeping it short and simple in all of these encounters and interactions, we'll move on. Also in 1976 came a report from my beloved home state of New Jersey. Officer Frank Ingargola and newspaper reporter Sonny Schwartz were in Ventnor, New Jersey, which is a part of the so-called Jersey Shore, and is actually a little city on Absecon Island, which sits within the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know what the men were doing there because there isn't much to this report, but either way, they both reported that they had seen a spherical white luminous object with a bright haze around it over the boardwalk and along the sea nearby them. This object seemed like it was following them, and they wondered amongst themselves what to do about it and what in the world they were dealing with or looking at. That's when they saw right near the object a, quote, very tall man with immense broad shoulders, end quote, lurching down the boardwalk towards them and right up to the front of the vehicle they were sitting in at the time. The man wore a 3/4 length suede coat and a 10-gallon Stetson hat. Several other police officers were called into the area to investigate after several locals called in to report the strange intruder and whatever else was going on in the area at the time. This spherical shaped craft, this lumbering man, they were seen by more than just the officers. They were seen by officers all over the place in the area, and also by locals who just were looking out their window or out on the boardwalk, or many reports about this came in, is my point. The sergeant was able to observe the object from a distance through binoculars after Frank called in several other officers and called into that sergeant as well. I was very irritated that no matter how many articles I went through or resources I looked through, I could not find how this one ends. I will say this, though, it's not surprising to me that there was a craft and possibly an extraterrestrial attached to it seen near the ocean and hovering over one of, if not the longest boardwalk in this state. We just talked about how the entities themselves admitted to having crafts underwater, under and inside of the ocean, and that's something I've talked about here on this channel with these videos and in live streams many times, USOs, underwater submerged objects. I wonder if the craft broke down and perhaps the entity or alien was pissed and didn't want people seeing what was happening, but as far as I could find, no one was attacked. But also, I didn't find any information on anyone actually approaching it or it actually approaching anyone either. So it really could have been any number of endings. Let's move on. In 1990, several police officers who were guarding the area of Lajas Airport in Puerto Rico, where the radar blimps were stored, had something extraordinary to report. I'm just going to read you guys the full report. It says, quote, one night, one of the policemen noticed from a distance that there seemed to be some children playing on the concrete platform for the anchoring of the blimp. He approached the site in his patrol car and turned on his car's spotlight, only to see that instead of children, there were really several strange creatures described by him as 3 to 3.5 feet tall, big-headed, and grayish in color. Sound familiar? The small beings fled, running in different directions, and the policeman called by radio asking for backup, repeating the 1050 code, officer needs assistance. When help arrived, the creatures had disappeared. An extensive search was carried out, but to no avail. Some days later, another group of policemen there saw a top-shaped UFO with a golden aura around it, and it almost landed on the aerostat premises. The next day, another of the mysterious circles appeared on the ground right where the UFO was sighted. The circle was erased from the ground when orders were given to use a bulldozer and remove the topsoil, end quote. That confused me a little bit. Army bases, military areas, and airports. Oh my. I'm not surprised at all, and it sounds like the Greys to me, but who can really be sure, and who really knows why they were there, what they were doing at that time, etc. Now, why in the world someone would give orders to destroy a freaking crop circle is absolutely insane to me, but that seems to be what happened, and that's all I could find about this encounter. Here's where my confusion came in, because I noticed it said, quote, another of the mysterious circles appeared on the ground right where the UFO was sighted, end quote, but it never mentioned a first one, so who knows, and what happened here is anyone's guess at this point. I found a report from a police officer in Pennsylvania from as recently as August of 2017. The officer was driving in the evening time along a rural and very isolated road in a wooded location in southwestern section of Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, and he had a very strange, close encounter. As he made his way through the gloomy and very remote area, he noticed a silvery sheen of light ahead of him, which seemed to be hovering close to the ground. As the officer approached the light, he saw that it seemed to be emanating from a ball of light and was actually the head of a creature he described as looking something akin to Bigfoot, but not really. Researcher Stan Gordon investigated this one, and this is his report. Quote, "The ball of light was actually the head of a very strange being that looked to be about 6 feet tall or larger. It was tall and almost skeleton thin. The officer was of the opinion that the creature, when he first observed it, had been lying on its belly on the ground with its head facing toward the road. It then stood up, facing the road. In that dark location, he saw the dull light from the glowing head illuminating the upper section of the body of the creature. While the officer watched, the creature turned toward the right. The dull illumination from the head lit up the shoulder area. The creature then turned and faced him, then turned to the left and took off at an incredible speed, away towards a location away from the road. As it moved off, the witness could see its arm swinging. The officer indicated that it took off at a speed you could only call abnormal. It was faster than anything I have ever seen. It was there, then it was gone. It was faster than anything I have ever seen. It was there, then it was gone. The witness assumed that the creature moved on 2 legs. However, he could not see the lower sections of the body in the dark. The witness described what he saw as standing 6 feet or taller. The head was about 8 to 10 inches in diameter and shaped like a ball. He said the head was just a ball of light, possibly egg-shaped but pretty round. The light emitted seemed to be just a dull white. The light illuminated the shoulders, the top of the chest, and a section of the arms. The witness could not see the hands. The chest looked to be about 18 inches across. The waist appeared to be small, but the arms were abnormally long. The long limbs looked skeletal, but with no muscle mass. The skin tone of the body appeared to be dull grayish blue. The witness could not see any facial features. The entire experience only lasted about 10 seconds. The officer was confused as to what he saw and about what could move so fast. He pulled up his vehicle to the location where the creature had been standing and turned on his vehicle spotlight. He looked around the area but saw no evidence on the ground. The officer, after the experience, continued to try and make sense out of what he had encountered, but he could not figure it out. The officer, after the experience, continued to try and make sense out of what he had encountered, but he could not figure it out. I was contacted soon after the incident, and we later discussed the incident in detail." End of quote. I do not know how this is even remotely somewhat similar to Bigfoot, but I guess that's where the "but not really" part of that quote comes in. I mean, I don't know. Similar to Bigfoot, but not really. Not really at all. So anyway, that's where the report actually ends, and it's so incredibly frustrating because he is literally saying that the whole report and encounter was discussed by the two of them at great length and in detail, but then there's nothing more out there about it. At least nothing that I was able to find. Speaking, kind of, not really, of Bigfoot, there's been an awful lot of reports of police officers coming into contact with what they believe was Bigfoot as well, and in fact, I will be doing a whole video on that soon as well. For now, though, let's look at a few more cases of officers who have had these bizarre and highly strange types of encounters. On September 3rd, 1965, Deputy Sheriff Bob Good was out patrolling Highway 35 just outside of Damon, Texas, and he was with another officer, a Chief McCoy. Everything had been perfectly ordinary for most of the time they were on patrol, but around 11 at night, it all started to get very weird and highly strange. They spotted at that time a purple light off in the distance a little bit as they stared, shocked at what they were seeing and talking amongst themselves about what it was exactly they were looking at. Another light detached from the main body, and they both just sort of hovered there. The officers were curious, and instead of fleeing, they started to drive all around a course of back roads that would get them closer to whatever objects were that were hovering there, and the backgrounds were very dark and mostly unlit. At the time they started to move closer to it, they estimated that it was about 5 or 6 miles away from them, so not that far off at all. They got as close as the roads would take them and stopped the car and just sat there staring at the objects from the side of the road. As they did this, both lights came rushing towards them in their vehicle with breathtaking speed and covering several miles in just a second or two. These objects positioned themselves right above the vehicle, bathing the entire landscape in a bright purple light. They said, quote, "It looked like daytime in some alien world," end quote. Later on, McCoy described the object as, quote, "as big as a football field," end of quote, and he would also report about the frightening experience, quote, "The bulk of the object was plainly visible at this time and appeared to be triangular shaped with a bright purple light on the left end and the smaller, less bright blue light on the right end. The bulk of the object appeared to be dark gray in color with no distinguishing features. It appeared to be about 200 feet wide and 40 to 50 feet thick in the middle, tapering off towards both ends. There was no noise or any trail. The bright purple light illuminated the ground directly underneath it and an area in front of it, including the highway in the interior of our patrol car. The tall grass under the object did not appear to be disturbed. There was a bright moon out and it cast a shadow of the object on the ground immediately below it in the grass," end quote. The two men sped out of there as fast as they could, and when they looked back, they saw that the objects had shot back into their original positions just as quickly or faster. They were still curious, and so they stopped again when they were much further away to observe the objects, but then they started getting scared that the same thing would happen to them again, and so they drove off and never looked back. The men must have reported what happened to them and what they witnessed because they were later interviewed by a Major Lawrence Leach Jr. of Ellington Air Force Base, who deemed both men to be very sincere and of sound judgment. He stated, quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that they definitely saw some unusual object or phenomenon," end quote. I found an encounter from sometime in the 1970s that I could only describe as harrowing and somewhat terrifying that was relayed by an officer, Manuel Amparano of Kerman, California. It was May 13th, 1978, and a little after 3:30 in the morning when he was out on a routine patrol and noticed, quote, "a circular type thing similar to a round fireball or a setting sun about 100 to 150 feet off the ground," end quote. He got closer so that he could investigate what he initially thought was a possible fire, and when he got closer, it did look like it was a tree that was on fire. Suddenly, though, and I'm sure to his shock and surprise, it lifted off the ground and he very quickly trained his searchlight onto the object. He was then met with a bright blue flash of light, and then whatever it was sped off into the night sky. The officer quickly realized that the flash must have been some sort of weapon he was hit with because he was left with burns on his face and chest from it. He said, quote, "It was like a sunburn when you fall asleep at the pool. There were white blisters on the parts of my body facing that light. I also had trouble with sunlight. It was like right after you have your eyes checked and they are sensitive to light. That lasted about a week," end quote. So guys, I get criticized all the time in the comments and in emails with people saying that I'm always advocating for extraterrestrials and claiming that they're all good and peaceful, but I've never once said that. And here is the type of case that proves exactly why we shouldn't be all living under that delusion. When doctors examined Officer Amparano, they agreed that he had received microwave burns, though no one understood how such a thing could have ever happened. The area where it happened was investigated, and there were areas where there was nothing but dead vegetation where nothing ended up growing in those patches and spots for years after that. Apparently, though, nowadays, the whole thing is an almond orchard. So our last encounter, but certainly not the last encounter in my research, so there will be another one of these videos shortly if you all want one, comes from Marshall County, Minnesota, and it happened on August 27th, 1979. Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson was put on patrol near the North Dakota border when he saw a strange light somewhere off in the wilderness. He pulled over to the side of the road to get a closer look, and as he did, the light began approaching his car at an unimaginable and terrifically fast rate of speed, and it was almost like it was on a collision course with him and his vehicle. There was a bright flash of light, and then Officer Johnson lost consciousness. As he passed out, he saw the brilliant flash of light and heard the sounds of breaking glass. When he came to, he was sitting in his car, which was stalled, and though he said he was happy to be alive, he was very alarmed at the fact that he couldn't see anything at all. He was blind. Also odd was the fact that the car wasn't in the same spot where he had parked it and where the light had collided with it and had moved some distance away from that spot. Later on, he would say of it all, quote, "I noticed a very bright, brilliant light, 8 to 12 inches in diameter, 3 to 4 feet off the ground. The edges were very defined. I thought perhaps at first it could be an aircraft in trouble, as it appeared to be a landing light from an aircraft. I proceeded south on number 220. I proceeded about a mile and 3/10 or a mile and 4/10 when the light intercepted my vehicle, causing damage to a headlight, putting a dent in the hood, breaking the windshield, and bending antennas on top of the vehicle. At this point, at the interception of this light, I was rendered either unconscious, neutralized, or unknowing for a period of approximately 39 minutes. From the point of intersection, my police vehicle proceeded south in a straight line 854 feet, at which point the brakes were engaged by forces unknown to myself, as I do not remember doing this, and I left about approximately 99 feet of black marks on the highway before coming to rest sideways in the road with the grill of my hood facing in an easterly direction. At 2:19 a.m., I radioed a 1088, officer needs assistance, to my dispatcher in Warren, end quote. His call for help was quickly answered, and he was rushed to the hospital with what looked like burns on his face and irritation to his eye area. Meanwhile, the patrol car he had been driving had a right smashed front headlight, a crack in the windshield on the driver's side, and the antenna on the roof had been bent to about a 60-degree angle. The windshield is what struck most involved as particularly weird, as it seemed like it had sustained, quote, "inward and outward forces acting simultaneously," end quote. All of the damage was on the driver's side of the window, and the interior clock was 14 minutes slow, which Johnson says wasn't the case before the incident had occurred. Oddly enough, his wristwatch was also 14 minutes slow, too. Experts who examined the vehicle couldn't explain the peculiar damage it had incurred and said that it certainly wasn't any sort of ordinary collision. The official explanation ended up being, quote, "mechanical forces of unknown origin," end quote. His eyes did heal, though, and he eventually did regain all of his eyesight. It makes sense to me that people who put their lives in danger daily and who also spend a lot of their time patrolling areas of backwoods and rural routes that are almost always isolated and not too well lit, as well as those same people who go out and answer calls from other people having those same strange experiences so that they don't have to put themselves in any danger by investigating it themselves, would so commonly encounter UFOs and their occupants, whatever they may be in each case. Now, I can't say for sure what's going on in any of these specific cases, but a lot of what I've reported to you here today makes sense because of what we already know to be usual in these types of encounters. Let me know what you all think in the comments below, please. As always, that's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me, and if you watched in the premiere and enjoyed hanging out with one another. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, please, and make sure your notification bell is turned on. Please check out the description box for some important links. All of my books on Kindle and paperback on Amazon, also available on Audible, ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list gift link, and the tentative schedule for most weeks here on this channel. When the live streams, the pre-recordeds, all of that's happening, that schedule in the description box, along with everything else and other information. If you have your own encounters with the weird, strange, supernatural, paranormal, otherworldly, extraterrestrial, anything like that, please send them in for my listener encounter series or any other correspondence if you want signed books. GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com is my email address. Also, if you bought any of my books, Missing the Faith Theory, the bestseller Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis and Beyond, the bestseller Danger at Your Door, Encounters with Black-Eyed Kids, the companion book to that, Midnight Visitors, Tales of the Black-Eyed Children, or Campfire Stories Volume 1 or Volume 2, which is out for pre-order now. But if you bought and or read any of those in the past, no matter how long it's been and you haven't done so already, please go to Amazon and leave a 5-star rating and a really good review. That helps get the books back out into the public eye, helps them be pushed forward more on Amazon so more people can see them and more sales can come from them. I recently did Afternoon Talk with Ghost Dragon ZW, and we reviewed for the last half hour of that hour-long stream all the new merch designs for Gemma Jade and Ghost Dragon ZW merchandise. There's some really beautiful stuff. I also put some pictures in the community tab, so contact Arisha over at jivecreations.com for Gemma Jade and Ghost Dragon ZW merch. I'm so proud of this new merchandise. I've been proud of it all along. The merch is just amazing. The designs are beautiful. It's high quality stuff. But now with the new design and all of these new things like the car tags and the keychains and just, I don't know, there's just so much, and I'm so excited about it. So please go over to jivecreations.com and check it out, or check out Afternoon Talk from February 6th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It's one of the live streams we already did, and the last half hour of that show has the merch unboxing on it. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If no one told you today, you're beautiful, you're amazing, you are more than capable, you are smart, you are fun, you are amazing. So I can't say amazing enough. I just don't know how to build you guys up other than telling you how incredible you are, because I know a lot of people don't have that in their real lives, right? So I want y'all to hear it from somewhere. It might as well be me, and I really do believe it, because most of us in this community and on this channel, we're a big family and we're light workers, and we really need to have each other's backs and bring kindness to the collective at large so we can get that 3D, that consciousness shift from 3D to 5D moving along a lot quicker. I got your back and I believe in you. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and don't forget to keep watching and supporting all of my shorts, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.